This is how I use sidechaining to gain clarity in my mixes, but it's not the way that you're thinking. Right now, we have the session for the Archetype Pliny X demo song that I wrote a little while back. And if you want to see me write that song from scratch, you can check it up in a video here or here. I don't know. I always forget where the card is. Before we really get into it, I'm going to mention that this is going to be a little bit more of a long-winded video. It's not going to be those really short, sharp, shiny videos that I've been making lately. I kind of want to explain this as properly as I can. I want to take my time, and this video is probably going to end up being a little bit longer, a little bit more conversational. So if you're down, sit down, grab a cup of tea, and let's get into it. If you're not familiar with sidechaining, in layman's terms, it's basically making something happen on a certain instrument within your mix via the input of another instrument. The most classic use case and easiest way of explaining sidechaining is sidechaining your kick drum to your bass guitar. Because bass guitar and kick drum kind of take up the same frequencies in a frequency spectrum, they're very focused on low end. You know, they can take up anything from, 0 all the way up to 150, 200. What ends up happening is that sometimes they end up clashing on top of each other. And when you get into like really dense modern metal mixes, some things get lost. For example, maybe the kick drum isn't pushing through the mix as much as you'd like, and everything seems a little bit cloudy. And if you were talking to the bass guitar like it was a real person, you basically say, hey, bass guitar, I want you to listen to the kick drum, and whenever the kick drum gets hit and makes noise, I want you to duck your frequencies exactly where that kick drum is. And in doing so, it allows the kick drum to come through in the mix a little bit more. You get a little bit more oomph, a little bit more power. It's not as cloudy. And utilizing this kind of way of thinking across multiple instruments and multiple things in a mix in different ways can really, really, really help gain clarity in your mixes. That classic, kick drum and bass drum example is being used in this mix here. Right now, we've got all the mixes open. Apologies that it's a little bit messy. Not everything is color coded. I've tried my best, but as we all know, when we really get into mixing songs, if we're not careful, things just kind of go all over the place, but I will explain it as we go on. So my kick bus here highlighted in red, as you can see on the bottom, it is routed to my bass bus over here. It's not actually sending the kick into that bass bus, like it's not doubling it up. You're not hearing the kick twice. It's just sending the signal through. It's technically muted from the output, but the bass bus can still hear it. The way that I am sidechaining my kick drum to the bass is I'm using Soothe 2. Now this is a little bit different. Most people probably use like a ProMB or like another form of multi-band compression plugin, but I've been using Soothe 2 lately. I think that it's a little bit more accurate, and I'll show you why. So as I play this, what you see happen is Soothe 2 isn't listening to the bass channel even though it's on the bass bus. It is being sidechained and it's listening to the kick drum, and every time the kick drum gets hit, what you see is this kind of scoop that I've set kind of, below 70 hertz-ish. So anything below 70 hertz, which is where the kick drum is, it's going to be listening to that. And again, that's more of like, I've kind of figured it out where it is by using EQ and stuff like that. Like this isn't a one case fits all thing. Like if you want to be really, really, really accurate, I highly suggest that you use an EQ to find whatever frequency is the most prominent in your kick drum, in your mix, and then apply this to that. So I'll pop my headphones on and watch what happens to the bass bus every time the kick gets hit. So as you can see, whenever the kick drum gets hit, the bass ducks in that exact frequency, and I'm purposely using fast attack and fast release because it's really just that initial impact of the kick drum. The kick drum is a very transient heavy part of the drum set. Like it's just very momentary. It doesn't really linger. Not like bass guitar where if you ring out a note, the bass will stick around. So in doing so, you're only really kind of attenuating that initial transient, and you can still let the bass guitar breathe for the longevity of the note of however long it goes for after that. Because kick drums are so easy to kind of get a sense of exactly where they are, especially when it's this low on the frequency spectrum, because that is what a kick drum is. It's much easier to use Soothe, and as you can see, as it bounces around, it kind of follows like the swoop of the kick drum, if that makes sense. You kind of like see it moving like this. If I can give an example, you can kind of see the frequency moving like this, like it kind of moves right to left as it decays, if that makes sense. That's why I use Soothe, because I think it's a little bit more accurate, and doing that across not only bass, but rhythm guitars as well, it really helps make sure that that kick drum comes through clear as day. Another thing that I'm using, not with Soothe, but I am using Fab Filter ProMB. I'm doing a sidechain between the snare and the bass. I really like heavy snares in mixes. This is a personal thing. Like, I like when I can hear the snare. I like when I can hear the pop and body of the snare. And sometimes, especially in dense mixes like this, where there's, you know, so many instruments happening at once, it can tend to get lost, especially in the mid-range of guitars, in that mid-range of bass. So by adding an instance of ProMB, I can, you know, find the crack of the snare where most of that information is on that particular snare drum, and tell it to duck in that exact frequency by, again, sidechaining the snare drum to my bass bus. And that's exactly what happens as I play it here. Again, it's really momentary. It's only really happening on that crack of the snare, so that really comes through, and then it nicely decays off, so you can still get the longevity of the bass note on top of it. Sidechaining is also really handy if you have any extra post-production or extra subs or something like that in your mix, where you're looking for those like impact sounds, but at the same time you don't want it to cloud the instrument bus or just cloud the mix in general. Most of those impacts and most of those sounds are, like, you know, very prominent in the low end. So again, by adding Soothe, I can really dial it in and make sure that whenever there's a big impact or like an extra kind of sound effect like I've got here, it doesn't impact the instrument bus with kick drum, bass guitar, and rhythm guitar happening all at the same time in the same spot whenever something comes in the song. And as I play it here, you see that happen in motion. And then as that sound dies off, you see it kind of just taper away and then not do anything. That's the beauty of sidechaining. It only happens when you tell it to work, basically. It's only happening when the input from the other instrument is active. Another way that I'm using sidechaining is on my guitars across pretty much all of my guitars. So as you can see, the way that I set up my sessions here is that I have this black fader here, which is like all my guitars. And then within that, I have like a master rhythm guitar bus, a master layer lead guitar bus, a master lead guitar bus, and a clean guitar bus, but that's not in this section of the song, so we don't need to worry about it. But basically, because there is a lot of distorted guitars happening at the same time, the way that I like my songs to sound, I like them to sound very large and very kind of emphatic, and I want there to be almost like a soundscape underneath the guitars at any given moment, which is why I have this layer lead guitar here. Problem is that because, again, high gain guitars kind of take up all those same frequencies in the upper mid-range between, say, like 1 and 3K. Sometimes it can get a little bit too much when you have a lot of guitars going on at the same time. And I'm not too fussed about like the intelligibility of those parts. I'm mainly just focusing on what it's doing in the mix and how it's sitting in the background. So what I'm able to do is I sidechain my rhythm guitars to my layer lead. So basically what's happening is whenever my rhythm guitar is playing, it's ducking in the frequencies that are most prominent in the rhythm guitars, and anything else that is, you know, not really a worry, that's where the layer lead kind of fills in and takes that space. So as you can see here, I've set the release a little bit slower. I've not been as careful with the sharpness and selectivity. I'm looking for like kind of rounded divots to duck. I don't want it to be so precise, but what ends up happening is, again, any of those frequencies that are predominantly being taken up by the rhythm guitar is being ducked in the layer lead bus so that it doesn't take up the same space. Whatever is not being used by the rhythm guitar is being taken up by the layer lead, and vice versa. If I bypass this, what you tend to notice is that it gets a little bit louder, obviously, because, you know, you're kind of bringing all those frequencies back up, but it gets a little bit cloudy, especially towards like the low end to low mids. Again, it's super, super subtle, but when you do this enough across a bunch of different instruments and a bunch of different use cases within a mix, it does all add up and it does get you a really nice end result, which we will get into at the end of this video. Another instance of like guitar sidechaining that I do is sidechaining my lead guitar to a lot of things in the mix, but one of them is the rhythm guitar. Because lead guitars, I'm kind of viewing them as like the vocal of my mix. They are the thing that's meant to be in the forefront of the mix, and I want to present them that way to the listener. So when they listen to it, they can go, hey, this is like there. It's not on top of everything, but it's definitely what I'm meant to be hearing right now. And by sidechaining the lead guitars to the rhythms, again, it's the same idea where, you know, lead guitars aren't happening all the time, but when they are, I'm very, very careful of where I'm ducking the rhythm guitar so that the lead guitar can come through, as you can hear right now. As you can probably tell, with this sidechaining going on, the lead guitar sticks out a little bit more, not in an abrasive way, but you can hear it just a little bit better. It's not being clouded by the same frequencies that the rhythm guitar is taking up. When I bypass it, the rhythm guitars kind of push up in those frequencies, and in my opinion anyway, as what I'm hearing right now, the lead guitar starts to get a little bit lost. It starts to not get as tangible. You can't really hear the notes. Again, it is subtle, but when you do it in enough use cases, you can really notice the difference across an entire mix. Again, it's kind of the same idea where in pop songs and stuff like that, most of the time producers and engineers are sidechaining the vocal track to the instrument bus so that whenever there isn't a vocal happening, the instruments can breathe and do their thing. And whenever a vocal gets kicked in, that kind of get sidechained and the vocals take up where they need to go. Basically, I'm treating my lead guitars as if they are a vocal, which is how I write most of the time anyway. And again, in doing so, I'm also sidechaining that lead guitar to my drums as well. So if we enable these drums as well, you can see here on the drum sum bus, basically like the master drum bus, I am very selective with what I want to cut out. Basically, it's like the mid-range of the lead guitar. Low end and high end and stuff like that, whatever, that can all get together. There's not much of that happening anyway, but within the mid-range of the kit, I want it to kind of duck whenever the lead guitar is playing, because that is where most of the tangibility of that lead guitar part is happening on the frequency spectrum. So again, it's the same idea where I'm sidechaining on soothe, but I've got a low cut and a high cut going on. So again, it's not affecting the low end or the high end. And this is what that sounds like. Again, subtle, but watch what happens when I bypass both of these sidechain instances in both the drum bus and the rhythm guitar bus for the leads. Just by those two examples alone, it starts to become very clear how much of an effect it has in, pushing that lead guitar up. Again, not in an abrasive way, but really letting it stand out in the mix, not on top of everything. Everything can still be heard. You can still hear the snare, you can still hear the kick, you can still hear the rhythm guitars, but it's just carving out the perfect space for that lead guitar by sidechaining. So to show the differences of what all of this can do in a full mix across a bunch of different instruments, what I've got is I've got two files here. One of them has no clarity adjustment, where I have no sidechaining going on. Kick isn't sidechained to bass, lead guitars and sidechained to rhythm, nothing's going on. And in the other example, I am utilizing everything that I just showed you. So we'll listen to the one with no clarity, and then I'll chop it up and put the clarity example right after it so you can hear the differences straight away. as you can probably hear from both of those examples, what happens with the clarity version is that you start to hear the kick a little bit more, the snare definitely comes through a lot more, and again, the tangibility of those lead guitar notes start to stick out a lot more. Even when there's, you know, layer guitars, rhythm guitars, heavy drum room going on, you can still hear every single note that's happening in that lead guitar, where when there's no side chaining, it starts to get a little bit lost. You can still hear it, but everything starts to get a little bit mushy, especially within the rhythm guitars. Like, they appear to be a lot louder. They cloud the mix a lot more. Nothing is being attenuated. And there still is volume automation going on within this mix, but this side chaining method is just like the extra sprinkle on top to make sure that every single note gets heard loud and clear. Again, super, super useful, especially when it's like a super dense modern metal mix, just like this one, where you want to have that power, you want to have that punch. Again, you want to hear that kick drum, you want to hear that snare, you want to hear the transies happening within the palm mutes of the guitar. You want the bass to kind of have this underlying low end that sits underneath the mix the entire time and doesn't get in the way of anything else. It's kind of just like a bed of audio information, which is exactly what I look for in my mixes. Let me know what sidechain combinations you're using in the comments below if you are already using some. And if you want to see this in a more one-to-one personal kind of way, where I take a call with you and we go through your mixes and we can assess exactly how to get more clarity, exactly how to better your mixes. I do mix revisions on Twitch every Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, depending on what part of the world you're from. And if you'd like to go through it on a real one-on-one basis, you can book in a lesson with me and you can just hit me up on Instagram and we can go from there. Thank you so much. I'll catch you guys later. Peace.